What is up, guys? So, welcome to my review for Arrow Season 7, Episode 1, titled Inmate number 4587, or just Inmate 4587. So, everything we were being told about this episode, how badass the fight scenes, like they were telling us how good the fight scenes are, like the storyline that the seasons are going to delve into, the trailers, the promotional photos, and the synopses. This episode looked really, really good, and I'm happy to say this episode actually does not disappoint. In fact, it's actually a little better than I expected it to be, and I'll go over why I think that in this review. So, this episode sees Oliver in prison, not for the first time, because we did see him in prison in the season finale of Season 6, but this is the first time we see his life in prison, and it is very depressing to see him in prison. And then, like, in the beginning of the episode, you see the dream sequence, which I did predict will be how the season would start. But we see his life in prison, and then he goes to sleep, wakes up again, and he does the exact same thing. Then it cuts to this pretty cool title card, which is a new title card, but that is a very kind of depressing first scene for the show, and I like that a lot. I think it was a very good way to set the mood of the episode and probably the season in general. But everything about Oliver in prison was even better than I expected it to be. Not only was the storyline very compelling, there were a lot of emotional moments, a lot of moments that made me actually audibly gasp, like moments that made me react to them, which sometimes watching these shows I don't really react to them because I don't know if I would make a very good react channel, but I definitely just watch and just later talk about it in these videos. Usually I don't react to them. One of the times I do remember reacting was in the season finale of season 5, where it ended, and I was like, my mind was blown. I was like, what? That's how it ends, like out loud. And I think this episode got a very similar reaction to me from the twist at the end, which I will go over in this video. But a lot of reactions from all the brutal fight scenes, all the moments with Oliver in prison that actually made me audibly react out loud, which was awesome from this episode to actually bring that out of me, which is, just like I said, awesome, because it means that this episode is a great episode in my opinion. Oliver being in prison, based off this episode, I feel like that storyline itself can just carry the entire rest of the first half of the season by itself, because it's so compelling. Like in this episode, whenever it cut to something that wasn't Oliver in prison, it was way less interesting. That's not to say everything else was not interesting at all, because that's not true. Most of what happened in this episode was very interesting, and I will go over all of that in this video. But whenever it cut away from Oliver in prison, I was slightly less interested, which just, I feel like Oliver Queen in general definitely carries this show very, very well. Most of the time, I couldn't care less about the side characters if they're not interacting with Oliver specifically. Like if they're on their own storylines, if they're not really reacting or interacting with Oliver, I really couldn't care less, because Oliver really carries the show. This episode doesn't have that problem. There were some great side storylines without Oliver Queen, but I would say that everything happened in prison was much more compelling and much more enjoyable than everything that happened outside of it, maybe except for the twist ending, which I will go over in this video. But everything that happened in prison was awesome. Him fighting with his old enemies like Derek Sampson, just Brick, and Bronze Tiger, all awesome. Love to see that. That irredeemable thing that Stephen Amell mentioned was Oliver not helping Stanley when he was being brutally beat up, which another moment that made me react, like actually react in real life, which, like I said, doesn't happen very often, but it did, and it was one of those moments like that, which was great. And then there was an emotional moment after that when Stanley talked to Oliver about how he was wrongfully in prison, which was a great emotional moment. And it's just moments like that that made this storyline so compelling, and the brutal fight scenes were a huge part of that as well. So I would say, out of everything that was being hyped up for this episode from the people who made the episode, the fight scenes were the thing that those people were most excited about. Like, that's the thing that they wanted the viewers to see the most, just because these fight scenes are awesome. I wouldn't say they are the best Arrow fight scenes ever, because Arrow has had some great choreography in seasons 1, 2, 3 as well, and then 5 and 6 as well. Mostly just 5. Like season 5's choreography and fight scenes were some of the best fight scenes I've seen in any TV show ever. And I think this episode, while it doesn't have the greatest fight scene in our history, it does have one of the best and definitely the most brutal, which is a big part of the reason that these fight scenes are so good. It definitely elevates them because they are so brutal. Like, there's this one scene where Oliver just picks up a weight from a bench press and just completely obliterates this guy, hitting him with this weight and then punching him like 30 times. It is a very brutal scene. There's this one scene in the shower, the fight scene. Obviously, this is not really a fight scene, but the brutal scene where Stanley's being beat up. There was some really crazy brutality in this episode, and while keeping it at a lower, not really rated R place, it was still done really, really well, and I would love to see more of these fight scenes, specifically between Oliver and his old enemies like Brick and Bronze Tiger, as well as Derek Sampson, as well as one other villain who Stephen Mel definitely teased will be returning for this season. We don't know who. He just said a villain who they did not confirm yet. Obviously, very excited to see that guy return, whoever he is. If he is a villain that I like, I don't know, but I would say the fight scenes, huge part about why this episode was so good. The prison scenes were not the only things that were happening in this episode. There was also those two side storylines, or actually three, because one of them was about that guy on the boat, which I gotta say, I'm very excited to talk about that. Before I do, however, there are the two side storylines were definitely not the better parts of the episode, but neither of them, or one of them wasn't that great, but one of them was actually very interesting. That one being the Renee, Dinah, and the new Green Arrow side storyline. So this side storyline mainly is interesting because I am very, very interested to find out who this new Green Arrow is. Going off of everything that happened in this episode, I'm not actually sure. I think it could be Roy Harper still. It could be the older William we saw at the end of the episode, which, again, very excited to talk about that in a minute, but I don't think I know who it is. Before this episode came out, I would have told you, I would have bet it is Roy Harper. At this point, I'm not actually sure, so I'm very intrigued, very interested, and very excited to find out who that is. Everything about this new Green Arrow in this episode was incredibly interesting, and Renee kind of working with this new Green Arrow and everything that he was about in this episode also very, very interesting to me. I really liked his role in this episode. Out of all the characters outside of Oliver Queen, outside of prison, Renee was definitely the character that was the most compelling in this episode, and I definitely think that you can't disagree with that. Like, Dinah, Diggle, and Curtis didn't really do much. Felicity, her storyline wasn't very good, but Renee definitely was the character that held this episode outside of prison, or at least the only character who had lines who did that, because the other characters that did were this new Green Arrow and other characters, but it's mostly really this new Green Arrow that really held up and really supported this side storyline, because without him, I feel like I wouldn't be as interested in it as I am in things like the Oliver in prison or the flash forwards in this episode, but I think him, as well as Renee in this side storyline, make it actually pretty interesting. So, like I said, you already know, the worst part of this episode was definitely the Felicity side storyline. That doesn't mean it was a bad storyline at all. I don't think it was. I think it had a lot of compelling moments, especially like when she was talking to Oliver in prison. I thought that was surprisingly well done. Like, I thought the actress, Emily Beth Rickards, did a surprisingly good job in that role, and whenever she was comforting William, I thought those scenes were actually pretty good. Like, I'm not hating on Felicity in this episode at all. I feel like her side story, very necessary for the narrative and the storyline that's going on. That being said, I lost every respect I ever had for Ricardo Diaz in this storyline, because he actually tried to kill Felicity and failed when nobody was there to stop him for like a solid 2 minutes. I didn't really have much respect for this character. I mean, he is a very underwhelming version of Ricardo Diaz, who in the comics is one of the best fighters in the universe, while on the show, not the best fighter ever. There were some other better fighters that Oliver went up against that are not Green Arrow. The actor isn't great in the role either, but every respect point that I had for him was completely gone when he tried to kill Felicity for a solid 2 minutes. Felicity fought back and managed to get some fight back at him, which put him off guard long enough for Argus to stop him, which we didn't see on screen, which so I thought was a little weird. They didn't show that. Like, did he get away? It wasn't very clear. He probably did, but I would say I lost every respect point I ever had for Ricardo Diaz in this side storyline. That being said, that's probably my only complaint about this episode, Ricardo Diaz in this episode, because everything else was great. And now we get to the thing that was definitely the most surprising to me, and that's the scenes where you see this guy on a boat heading to Lian Yu, and I definitely expected a couple things. First, when I saw that guy, I thought that's probably Ted Kord or whoever Daniel Porter is going to be, because Daniel Porter, his casting was never announced, and I feel like there would be a storyline in the first episode setting up Ted Kord, and then we see he gets to Lian Yu. Now, I thought still this is probably Ted Kord, but there must be a reason he's on Lian-Yu. Maybe the Blue Beetle, alien, or magic, whatever it is on Lian-Yu because that island is magical. Who knows? Whatever, I don't know. But then it was revealed that Roy Harper was on the island, which I did not see coming. I didn't see Roy Harper being in this episode at all. I definitely expected him to be this new Green Arrow. Watching that scene where he was revealed, I thought, is he not? But I saw that and I was like, whoa, that really, really shocked me. But then there was the scene at the end that it was revealed that is William Clayton, and then I saw an article on Twitter that said that this scene and every scene that will come after that, which are called flash forwards, take place 20 years in the future. So this reveal was one of the craziest reveals I've ever seen in a TV show. It was so surprising. I didn't know that something was going to happen at the end of the episode that was incredibly surprising. That's something that Stephen Amell teased in, I think, a Facebook video. He said that something like that would happen, but this is not something I expected to happen at all. This is a new thing they're having on the show this season, that they're called flash forwards, which are happening 20 years in the future, and I don't think they will actually connect to the main storyline in terms of actual in the narrative. I feel like they will have thematic similarities, just like the flashbacks in seasons 1 through 5, but they will be very similar, where instead of a flashback, it's a flash forward to 20 years, which is very interesting, and this twist and reveal, one of the most surprising things I've ever seen on Arrow, which is saying a lot for this episode. In conclusion, this episode had amazing action with the brutal fight scenes, very compelling storylines with Oliver being in prison and the new Green Arrow, as well as the 20 years in the future thing, which was not only compelling but very, very, very shocking, along with very emotional moments, as well as genuinely shocking moments, reveals, and twists, make for an amazing start to a very promising season of Arrow. Honestly, I don't have any complaints about this episode aside from Ricardo Diaz, but I don't think that's enough to knock off any points from the score, and I'll give this episode a 10 out of 10. So that is review for Arrow Season 7, Episode 1. I genuinely loved this episode, and I am very excited for the rest of the season, but let me know what you thought about the episode in the comments down below, as well as the poll in the top right corner of the video. And if you like this video, don't forget to leave a like, share, and subscribe. And thanks for watching.